Welcome to the Film Slate Magazine podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and host of today's show. Today I'm interviewing Kane Senes, who recently wrote and directed a film called Echoes of War, a post-Civil War drama starring William Forsythe and James Badge Dale. We talk about exactly how he got this film produced, so stay tuned for that. A quick few words about what I'm working on. I'm in the final stages of polishing up my mob action thriller screenplay. I'm doing the reading tomorrow at my writers group, and I'm sure I'll get a bunch of great notes, and then I'll spend probably another week rewriting it, and then I'll start sending it out. I'm still tinkering with the sci-fi thriller script I optioned last month. I've mentioned this project a few times on the podcast before. I did a read-through with the director and some actors a couple of weeks ago and got some notes from that. So now the director is asking for some more notes and some more, or now the director is asking for some more rewrites. It's nothing too major, probably just in a few hours worth of work, but it is starting to drag on a bit. This is unfortunately a fairly common occurrence. There's the old saying, a script is never finished, only abandoned. Hopefully this director will be ready to abandon this script, at least the rewriting of it, after this next pass. I'm also starting to rewrite the script I finished last summer. It's a sci-fi horror thriller screenplay. I have a writer-director friend who took a pass at the script, and we're thinking about trying to shoot this on a micro budget. Right now, as the script is written, it would be very tough to do. So I'm going to go back through the script and rewrite it and really keep budget in mind. We're actually going to look at some locations this week as well. We found some places pretty close to Los Angeles that seemed like they would be good for this particular script, and the people that have the locations seem very open to working with us on our micro budget. So I'm going to go out there, have a look at some of these locations. I've done this before in terms of looking at the location before writing the script. I think that actually writing the script when you have a specific location in mind can really help. It can really help you write the script and take advantage of a lot of the special things about the location. If there's some, special little spot in this location, some room that's very specific, you can really write around that if you know you have that location. I have done this before. One of the first movies that I ever had produced was a movie called Reunion, and we actually shot it at a friend's house. And I knew, like before I wrote the script, we went to the friend and said, hey, he's an actor. He was one of the actors in the movies, and we said, hey, can we shoot this movie at your house? He said, sure. So I wrote the script, taking advantage of every single room in the house just to try and open it up a little bit. And it was not a huge house. I mean, it's a 3-bedroom house, living room, kitchen, hallway, bathroom. There was a back patio room, and literally every single room is written into the script. And I was able to do that very efficiently because I knew the location before I wrote the script. Same thing with a script I wrote called Ninja Apocalypse. That was produced a couple of years ago. And it's the same thing. The producers, that was actually a writing assignment. The producers had the locations, and they sent me pictures of the different places that they knew they could shoot at. And so I was able to write those in there. Like one of the buildings had like a jail cell on the bottom of it. So it's like, okay, well, let's come up with a situation where we can use this jail cell. There was a boiler room in this beat up old building where they were shooting. So it's like, okay, we'll write the boiler room into the script. And again, I was really able to just use the special, unique features of this location in the script. And it makes the production value much better because you're not trying to like half-ass something or fit something in. I mean, if you write something, well, we need a jail cell, and then you can't find the jail cell, you're either having to, come up with something that sort of works, but sort of doesn't work. But in this particular case, as I said, I knew the locations, and I was really able to tie them into the script and tie them into the story. So it's a great thing to do if you can get your locations locked before you actually write it. I think that's pretty much it for what I'm working on. As I said, I'm going to do the blast. I'm going to get the notes on my current script tomorrow, and then I'm going to start rewriting that. I'll be done hopefully by the time I record the next podcast, and I'll start blasting out my mob action thriller. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I'm interviewing Kane Senes. Here is the interview. Welcome, Kane, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Ashley. It's good to be here.
So to start out, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your career, kind of how you got started in the business as a director.
Well, I would say a fairly tried and tested kind of path in the sense that I went to film school. I studied film in Australia as part of my undergraduate degree at college, and then I went to film school here in the States for 2 years. And upon leaving, I went back home to Australia, and I worked as an assistant to a producer on The Great Gatsby, which was a big film that shot there. Obviously, huge kind of production. So I learned a lot from that, and while I was doing that, I wrote the script for Echoes of War, and then that's a whole other story. But as soon as that kind of got some traction through some producers in the States we found it, and meeting with actors and things, and then we went off and made that film. But for me, yeah, just making short films at school, experimenting on my own on the side, but it really professionally kind of started with assisting people in the film industry, and then going off and making my own film independently.
Okay. I want to touch on the shorts. One of the things, as I mentioned in the pre-interview, it's literally sellingyourscreenplay.com. So I get a lot of people emailing me just saying, they're out in the middle of nowhere and they're just trying to get some sort of a foothold in the industry. And I often recommend, I say the easiest thing you can do is to do a short. Write a short script and find someone locally, a director or a producer. You can shoot them nowadays for a few $100s. So I wonder if you can just take us through sort of, did that help you get the money for Echoes of War? And maybe just take us through sort of what you did with your shorts. I noticed on IMDb, they have awards. You had a couple of shorts that are listed. They have awards and stuff. So maybe just take us through, how you produced those and what you did with them to market them and if they actually helped your career.
Sure. Well, I always felt kind of that I was well supported in the sense that I made the shorts at school. You've got teachers there, you've got facilities, there's people that want to work on your film. So that definitely helped me. I'm not saying that film school is necessary in any way. If you can get out there and make your own stuff, then that's great. As long as you're getting that experience, I think that's all that really matters. But for me, just making the shorts, getting them out there, having them win some awards is definitely, it's always helpful. Part of me thinks it's kind of ridiculous, the notion of awards for art in general, but hey, I'll take it. And it's one of those things you slap it on your kind of investor materials when you're trying to build some traction for your film. So that helped. And then I would say the fact that my feature was an adaptation of a short that I actually made as my thesis film in film school, that directly helped me in the sense that I could show potential investors, hey, look, I've actually told a story that's very similar to this on a smaller scale. I've worked in this world. I've researched this time period. The feature obviously became something different and a lot more expansive and grew. But the fact that it was a direct kind of link to this film I had already made that I could show them and I could be like, hey, now imagine this, but on this kind of scale, and read this script and you'll see the correlation. So from a pitching perspective, that was helpful. I can't really speak as to what would have happened if I didn't have that short. I don't think ultimately the short was the reason why a casting director chose to read the script and champion it. I don't think the short had anything to do with the actors who signed on. That was mostly from the script itself for the feature, and me going and meeting with people and literally kind of selling them on the spot as to why they should help me make this film. But I think the short helped get us in the door with some of the investors potentially, although I've never really truly known. No one has ever said to me, hey, your short film is the one that won me over. It's just was something that we added to the packet, and if nothing else, just showed that I directed things before, and I was a first-time feature director, but it wasn't my first time directing.
Yeah, certainly. Just very briefly, you just said, it was fun to get those shorts out there. Just tell us, what does that exactly mean? Oh. Did you submit to film festivals? Did you send it to friends? Did your school have some outlets to get that stuff out there?
It was really just stone cold submitting to festivals. Just kind of through withoutabox.com. There's a lot of other ones out now, but at the time, that's pretty much the one that I used. And, just word of mouth, asking friends and teachers and things what festivals they recommended. So that was basically it. It was just kind of me reaching out to every kind of everyone out there that I knew of, and then also sending it around in as a private screen to certain kind of individuals that I wanted to see it. But in terms of the festivals, it was just submitting everything that I knew of. sure.
And I always just like to get a sense of the scope. I mean, I've been an independent filmmaker and I've submitted to festivals, and it's no shame. I mean, I'll submit, we submitted our film probably to 20, 30 festivals, only got into 2 or 3. So I'd be curious to get a sense of sort of the scope of how many festivals you submitted to versus how many you got accepted to.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't remember exactly back to the shorts, but I do know that, I mean, we definitely submitted to a lot more than we got accepted into, and that's always the way. And so to any kind of student or young filmmaker out there who's submitting and getting knocked back from the first 10 or 20, that's totally normal. And I think you've just got to line it up to where the festival sees the film the same way that you do, and they get you on that. They understand the film on that kind of level, and they want it. And I don't think there's any use in going to or in banging on the door of a festival that just kind of hasn't got the same taste as you or doesn't really kind of believe in your film. Because for every one of those, there's another one that really does, and they'll champion the film, and they'll do a lot more for you at the festival if they believe in it. So I don't really care if I get knocked back on a festival. I mean, the one that does accept me, I always have a better time at that festival anyway, I feel. So.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so let's dig into the Echoes of War. Maybe to start out, you can give us just a quick pitch or log line of the script. I always link to the trailer in the show notes so people can learn about it there, but just pitch it to us in broad strokes at least.
I'll have to remember my elevator pitch from a couple of years ago. No. Well, it's basically the story about a soldier who's returning home from the Civil War in America, 1866 it's set, and he returns home to his family in the remote countryside of Texas, in the middle of nowhere, and he thinks he's kind of going to find some peace there. He's seen all of the horrors of war for the last 5 years, and instead he finds that the neighbors have been stealing from his own family while he's been gone, and been stealing food because rations are low, and so he takes issue with this and takes it upon himself to solve the conflict kind of by the only way that he knows how, which really is through the violence that he's been exposed to from the war. So it's a story of kind of bringing the demons home with you and infecting, I guess, this quiet piece of life that was awaiting him. And obviously it kind of goes from there.
Yeah. I'm always curious with a story like this that has really a strong sort of central character. What came first? Was it the character or was it the story as far as just coming up with this idea?
Yeah, well, it definitely goes back to the short film, which was always about, well, I guess it started with me wanting to tell a story about the relationship between a family member who's been away for a long time and coming back into the fold. So it was always a family story, but from the perspective of this kind of one guy. So that's where it started. And I remember back in the days when we were writing the short film and pitching it, and it kind of started from there, and then it became about, well, what does the family do? Okay, well, they're trappers. They kind of trap animals and sell their pelts in town and things. And then it became, well, okay, so what's the conflict that grows out of this? And the backdrop of like the Civil War was always something that we had in mind. So for me, it was more, it was creating the character, the main conflict, which was him reassimilating back to the family unit and the kind of struggles that come from that, and then the world as well. They always went hand in hand, and then came the actual kind of trying to figure out what kind of story or plot, more so story in this case, can grow out of that. So it definitely wasn't a case of like, hey, I've got a story about this guy who steals this briefcase and then figuring out the characters after. It was very much from the character, and the characters in the world came first, I think.
Yeah. I'm curious, and this was one thing that just really struck out to me as I was preparing for the interview. It sounds like you went to college here in the United States, so that perhaps is part of the answer. But what was fascinating to you about the Civil War? Because especially what you just said, this really is a character piece, and truthfully, you could almost set it in it could be a sci-fi. I mean, because it's really just about that conflict sort of between this guy and his family and then the other family. Well, what drew you? Why did you want to use the American Civil War, and what drew you as an Australian? I'm surprised you even know that much about our American Civil War.
I definitely didn't know that much about it until I started to research for the short film. And my co-writer, John Chris, is from Texas. And so I was living with him at the time when I was in college here in the States. And and we got talking, and I wanted to do something that was kind of turn of like the century. I just loved the look of that era. A lot of Terrence Malick's earlier films, especially Days of Heaven, his second film, which at the time was I was very kind of smitten with it. And so I always saw doing something around the Industrial Revolution, something around like the early 1900s. And then it was John who was like, hey, what about the Civil War? And I obviously had heard about it, but didn't really know kind of the details that well. And so I researched it a lot more. And I thought, hey, like if we set this kind of 40 years earlier, we've suddenly got this amazing backdrop about a kind of country that was torn in two, and what are the what's the aftermath of that? I mean, surely we still feel it here today, and it's like it's a kind of century and a half later. So that became a very interesting time period to play in, because I think as a screenwriter, what you're looking for is conflict always, and drama, and what better backdrop than the aftermath of a civil war, not just a war and soldiers returning home from a world war or from a conflict where Americans fought overseas, but this was an actual one of the bloodiest wars in history, and it was fought on American soil by Americans against Americans, and that's such an unfathomable thing these days. It still boggles my brain that happened. And so that became something that I became very enamored with, and not enamored with, I mean, it was terrible, but something that I became very kind of lost in the research of that. And I don't know, I mean, I think being over here while I made the short film, it was obviously an American film. It wasn't something that I made back in Australia. I think if that had been the case, maybe it never would have been the Civil War, you know. So I became very into American history while I was here. And I think when you're a foreigner, though, you grow up with this myth of America as this kind of superpower, and you grow up in American music and films and culture, especially when it comes to entertainment. And so we're always trying to figure out, well, what is it about America? And I think I just wanted to ask that question. And as soon as you ask that question, you start to break it down, and this notion of the American myth. And it really was founded in times like these, in the wars. I mean, wars are such a great kind of yardstick for measuring the history of a nation, you know. And so I think it all kind of stemmed from that. But ultimately, I mean, I like to think of it as a family drama, and that's something that's very universal, which I understood. And there's a lot of my personal views and things in there, and a lot of it is based on. I never went to war, but the idea of coming home to my own, when I was in the States and coming home to my own family in Australia, and finding that things have changed while I've been gone, you know, so that's where it kind of grew out of, as opposed to wanting to tell a historical document. But it was just great potential for a story, and I think a very significant time that anyone can be interested in, doesn't matter where you're from.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about your writing process, and I guess we can apply it specifically to this script. You know, how long did it take you to write the script, and what does your writing process look like?
So, I mean, I wrote this with John Chris, again, the guy that I co-wrote the script with, and we've written a few others since. So I would say that we're writing partners, we're creative partners. I've written things on my own, the short films and things, but it really, I think I enjoyed a lot more when I write with him. And I've written with others since too, and there's something about having a writing partnership that for me works better, just because not only do you motivate each other, but you've always got someone to throw ideas off of, right? And so for us, it was just a matter of looking back at the short and saying, look, I don't think we're done with this material. I think we only were scratching the surface. And so as soon as we had figured out how to expand the story, then it just became a matter of kind of sketching out the outline for the film. And the way that we do that is we write down scenes on cards. We keep writing down scenes, character ideas, we stick them all up on a wall, and we tend to kind of rearrange them until it's got some kind of order, and then we write it down as an outline that fits on one page, and the outline turns into a treatment, and it turns into the first draft of the script. And we write kind of like a tag team. So I might write a scene first and John will rewrite it, or John will write a scene first and I'll rewrite it. And it's really just a matter of going over each other's kind of voice and then adding our own voice and then having a first draft that we can look back on and figure out what's working, what's not working, and then it goes from there. And draft 2 is very much about kind of tightening the screws and honing in and figuring out what we both want to say. And so it's pretty conventional, I think, in that sense of outlining and planning and working out the beats and working out the characters. But it's definitely always kind of character first. Like we'll talk for weeks or months on end just about characters. Hey, how about a guy or a woman who's like this, or a kid who's like this, and what's their relation to each other? And once I think we had the families formed, the story kind of came after. Mm-hmm. So that's
I'm curious how much of your time is spent with sort of this outlining, the index cards, and the pre-writing versus, okay, now we're going to actually open up final draft and start, cranking out the pages. What percentage is on each one?
I mean, I would probably say at least 60% is on the planning. I tend to plan a lot. I don't know if it's because it's the best thing to do or if it just works for me, but it definitely... I think it's possible to get lost when you're writing a script and you're kind of so far down the rabbit hole, and then you make a change to something that affects this and that affects that, and it has this snowball effect, and before long you don't really know what you wanted to say in the first place, and it's just a big mess. I take my hat off to people who can just kind of sit down at a blinking kind of like line on a white page and just write. But I definitely, we work it all out first. And it changes, but we like to just keep going until we can read through a 10-page treatment or a 30-page treatment, and if that works as a complete story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, with character arcs, with things that you didn't expect, and with twists and turns, if it can read as a gripping short story essentially, and things make sense, and we're kind of plugging all the holes, then it's a lot easier for us to just say, right, now let's take this paragraph and turn it into a scene. And so the first draft comes very quickly in that sense. It's literally kind of just transcribing, it's adding the dialogue, it's just kind of filling out the scene that's already there in its barest sense. And so that just makes sense for me. That's just kind of structure that I can get my head around, and it's a process. It really is a process. It's like a factory line. But the real fun comes then from having the first draft and going, right, we can now read this through as a script, and diving into that. And some things that you add in the second draft change the whole thing. So I don't think that we're ever stuck to the outline or to the treatment, but it's definitely it's always there next to us as we're writing the script, so that we stick to the plan, at least for the first draft. Yeah.
Okay, so let's kind of take, you've now completed this screenplay. What was your next steps? How did you go out and start actually raising money and actually getting this thing produced?
Well, I went to film school with a guy called Juan Luna. He goes by JMR Luna, who is an independent. He's a producer in his own right, and he's a director too. He directed his first film last year as well. And we went to school together, and I always said, look, when I've written my feature, I'll send it to you, because he wanted to produce. And so he read it and he liked it, and he kind of came on board, and he ended up kind of bringing on board these 3 other producers who kind of were like a unit together, So they were guys back here in Los Angeles when I was in Australia. And I was working on The Great Gatsby, and I was getting towards the end of that, and they kind of got back in touch and were like, hey, what's going on with this film? I mean, are you still looking to make it? And so they really wanted to do it, and they saw an angle for it, and they had connections over here that I didn't really have, because I'd been home the 2 years since graduating from school, and they kind of they went to film school here at the AFI, which is a kind of a great school, and they made a lot of connections out of it, and they had been working professionally here for years already, and so we basically just decided to kind of to team up, and they got it in the hands of some good casting directors. Emily Schweber was the one that we ended up going with, and she's a veteran. She's been around for years. She was one of the casting team on Titanic, and she's kind of, I think as her career has progressed, she's gotten more into indie films, and she really wants, I think that she had done the big studio thing and kind of was more interested in telling these stories that needed some help to get off the ground, these kind of little films that she really believed in. And so she was huge for us. And I mean, really, as soon as she came on board, I mean, I was still back in Australia, and she was just kind of like, hey, look, I've lined up a bunch of meetings with actors, and I think you really should get over here and meet them all and start casting. And so that was the process. And like about a month later, I was here, and I felt like I was meeting with every single actor in town that wasn't called Brad Pitt, like guys that I'd watched on TV growing up, and just people that I didn't think that I would ever get to. So she really opened the doors on that. And from that point on, it was just going around town and knocking on a lot of doors and talking to film investors and people that have never invested in film but that wanted to, and basically just kind of money men, And that's where it grew from. And we managed to find our money that way. But it I definitely think it was because of the cast, as opposed to, I mean, there was no heat on me, So that's where it stemmed from. So our casting director and our producers were really key in taking the script and just kind of just putting it out to the world, because we had this thing and we were sitting on it. Not really knowing what to do with it, and kind of going around to people in Australia at the time with I had in our hands, and we raised a little bit of money that way, but not really enough to make a film. And then we did a Kickstarter, and we made a little more money, and so then we had enough to go, hey, we've got enough here to get a casting director on board, to maybe make some offers to some actors, and the rest of our budget came from that. So that's where I would say it started, yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, that seems pretty thorough. So
yeah.
I just want to clear up a couple things, be real specific here. It sounds like you had your cast when you started go to the money people. Maybe it was all happening simultaneously, but did you get the letters of intent from the cast, and then that helped you secure the funding, or was it just, more about selling the project and?
Well, it was hand in hand. I think we got to a point where we had enough money to make a version of the film, regardless what cast we had. But as we got interest from certain actors, that we were able to then simultaneously kind of take back to some of the money people that we had and say, hey, do you want to put in a little more? Because we really believe that these actors are legitimizing our project in a way where we'll get more exposure with them. Apart from the fact, of course, I mean, it goes without saying that they're great actors and they're suitable for the film, and that they would make the film better because we would have their experience and what they bring to the table. I really believe after doing this film that a known actor usually doesn't get to where they are without some form of talent. Sometimes you see some actors who co-spy on their looks or whatever, or get a lucky break, but definitely with the people that we use, there's a reason that they have careers. And so as they came on board, I feel like we were able to increase our budget a little bit. And so it was very much a simultaneous thing, but not wanting to kind of make that scrappy little film and just get by, that it ended up still being very tight. And an indie film in the truest sense of the term, but it definitely helped us to make it, I think, for a little bit more money and really the way it should have been made. I mean, we could have made it for a lot more, but it allowed us to go out and make a film and feel like we're not really compromising anymore on what our vision was. But specifically to answer your question, it definitely was a simultaneous thing, and like I said, there were two versions of the film. there would have been the no budget version, which would have been kind of a little scary, but I think we would have done it. But I'm glad we didn't, because I think we ended up making something that was able to have a life, and which is now getting released and getting some kind of traction. And I really do attribute that to the fact that we kept pursuing actors that would give us that kind of exposure.
Okay. I just want to run through a couple quick follow-ups on some of the stuff you just said. So it sounds like these producers, the one guy from your film school, and then he brought on these other producers, it sounds like they were the ones who had the connections with these money people, whether it be film financiers or just independent people who wanted to invest in a movie. That was how you got most of those connections?
Money actually kind of came from everywhere. I mean, I ended up being able to raise a lot from back in Australia, especially a lot of the people that we went to in the early days, like I said, when I was going like from door to door and getting no real bites, we were able to go back to some of those people once the film became more of a legitimized thing, I should say. And then actually that original film producer, J.M.R. Luna, was the one who ended up kind of bringing about half of the funding through a kind of connection that he had. So really kind of came from a lot of people, and the other producers going around as well, and bringing some things to the table. But the money definitely was a team effort. John Chris, my writing partner as well, was able to secure some from Texas. So kind of came drips and drabs for about half of it, and then the other half was from an investor that JMR brought to the table. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm curious, it's probably on the internet somewhere, but how much did you guys raise during your Kickstarter campaign?
It was about like $35,000.
Okay. And then just how much does a casting director of this level, what does a casting director cost if you want to hire someone like her? And you can just give us just a ballpark range.
Yeah, because I don't want anyone. Yeah, because I don't know if Emily wants everyone to know what she charges, but
we're talking less than 10,000.
It always depends on the project, and any of them will say that if a bigger film comes to a casting director, I believe that their quote is higher. If a very low budget film comes, then they'll definitely work with you. I mean, you should be able to get a decent casting director on a low budget film, but anywhere from 10 to 20 grand. I mean, less if you're a good negotiator, but I think you should expect to pay 10, 12 to 15. I mean, it really just depends what they've got going at the time. If they're more free at that time, or if it's a quiet time, then obviously they'll work with you a little more. But it really does come down to how much they believe in the script, and they won't. Not everyone will kind of bargain that low for everybody. You know what I mean? They've got to be passionate about it.
Sure. I'm curious. One other thing that occurred to me as I was preparing for the interview was, and I get a lot of people coming to me with historical dramas, and the one thing you did that I think was really smart was even though it was the Civil War, it was fairly contained. You didn't need the 1,000 rebel guys running across the field with a cannon. So it was still fairly contained, even though it was a period piece. But did you get any pushback on that? That's always just, the word on the street, especially the American Civil War, where it's not only a period piece, but I mean, I don't think this is going to necessarily play, in Europe or other Asia countries where they really don't care about the American Civil War. That could have definitely been a knock again. Do you get any pushback on that?
Not really, because I think it is set after the war, and it's really, like I said, the war is a backdrop. It's like watching a film about a veteran who comes back from Vietnam or from World War II. It's not necessarily about the war. It's more about how they reassimilate to society or to civilization or to their families. And so I think that's universal. So, I mean, I'm expecting our film to play in Europe and across the world. And there is some interest already from places like that. And I think that's more so to do with the fact that there's a cast that they recognize, that there's a story that is universal enough in the sense that it's really just about two families trying to make do out in the countryside. And it just so happens to be that there was this war that happened that kind of finished a year ago, and they're dealing with the aftermath. So I think we're fortunate in the sense that it works both ways. That it's a film that people who are Civil War aficionados or that are truly interested in the history of America can sink their teeth into. I think home front stories aren't something that are told that often, and especially like there might be some Vietnam home kind of stories about soldiers who return home, but rarely about the Civil War. I mean, we've all seen like Gettysburg and films like that, but this was really something else. It was something about the home front, and yeah, you could say, well, it could be any war, but I think what works specifically with this one is that it was a civil war, and here you have two families on the home front who kind of war against each other when this soldier returns. So it's like a microcosm, mini version of the Civil War. So it took the Civil War itself, the nature of a civil war, took on a larger meaning for us. But I definitely don't think it's necessary in being able to interpret the film. I think it's really just a human story and a family story, and everyone can relate to that. So it works both ways, I believe.
Absolutely, I do too.
Yeah.
I was just curious if, especially in the early stages, it doesn't sound like you did. Where was this shot? It looked great. Country, was it in Texas?
It was shot in Austin, Texas, which strangely enough is kind of where it was set, and we didn't necessarily always think that we were going to make it there. I mean, you've got Louisiana and New Mexico, these states that offer great incentives, and they're working on it in Texas, but definitely not at the time that we shot. The incentives weren't great. But mostly we actually went there because my producing and writing partner John had some connections there and was able to secure us some kind of land to shoot on and things like that. But it worked out, and I couldn't have been happier to shoot there. And the crews are great, and Austin's a great town. I mean, I'll go there for anything. But it was definitely unusual in the sense that. Like you said, I mean, it looks good, but it's countryside. I mean, it really could have been set anywhere. But story-wise, there was something very interesting about Texas. It was the furthest state away from the front lines. It's pretty south, and obviously the nature of the kind of Texan ideology of. I mean, it's the only state that was. I mean, the Lone Star State, I mean, it was its own country for a while. And so there's something very specific, I think, to the Texan mindset. And when you watch this film, you really understand this kind of cattle rancher who kind of does want to let go of his principles. And he doesn't want to he doesn't want to kind of compromise in any way. And I think you can attribute that in some way to a very kind of patriotic mentality. Even though the guy is not really a supporter of the Confederacy, which is kind of the interesting thing about his character, I think. But so story-wise, it made sense, and it just so happened to be that it worked out that we were shooting in hill country in Texas, which is where our story was set. So I was happy. I felt like the omens were there for us.
Yeah. So how can people see Echoes of War? Maybe you can just tell us about when it's being released. It will be a theatrical release, video on demand, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so it's theatrical and video on demand on the same day, on day and date, as they call it, on May 15th, through AMC theaters.
Perfect.
And it's a select kind of release in theaters, but depending on where you are, I mean, it's coming out in Los Angeles, in Burbank AMC, and I think somewhere else, which I'll need to look up and confirm. We're kind of still locking down all of that now. But New York, Houston, Dallas, and a few other places throughout kind of the country. So about 10 cities in total, and then video on demand on the iTunes store. I think we're working on a Netflix deal, but that's not locked down yet. So it'll definitely be on one of those providers. And cable, although I'm not sure if it's going to be, which cable provider just yet, but it'll definitely be on at least a few platforms. So that's exciting, and so there'll definitely be a way to see it if people want to see it.
Perfect. And I always like to end the interviews. If people want to follow you, keep up with what you're doing, do you have a Twitter account or a Facebook page or a blog? Or you can just mention that stuff.
You can find me. It's just my full name. So at Kane Senes, at KaneSenes.
Okay.
My same name on Facebook. And you can also, if it's easier to remember, you can go and look up at Echoes of War Film. But I believe it's FLM without the I. So at Echoes of War FLM. But if you just look up Echoes of War on Twitter, you'll see it, and Echoes of War on Facebook too. And also just online. I mean, if you Google it, it'll come up with the cinemas that we're going to be at and the dates and things like that. So
perfect.
Just remember the name, and that's all.
Perfect. I'll get all that and I'll put it in the show notes
Cool.
Everyone can just can click over to that. Well, Kane, you've been very generous with your time. This has been a great interview. I've enjoyed talking about this film.
Thank you, Ashley. Yeah, no, I've really enjoyed it too.
Thank you. Good luck with it.
Cheers.
So take it easy.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Also, a quick plug for the new SYS Screenwriting Analysis service. It's a really economical way to get a high-quality professional evaluation of your screenplay. All the readers have experience reading for studios, production companies, agencies, or contests. The readers I've partnered with are the gatekeepers of the industry. They're exactly the same people who are going to be reading your scripts at the companies that you submit to. The readers will evaluate your script on several key factors like concept and premise, structure, character, dialogue, and marketability. Every script will get a grade of pass, consider, or recommend, and I'm also offering a bonus. If you get a recommend from a reader, you get a free email and fax blast to my list of industry contacts. This is the exact same blast service I use myself to promote my scripts, and it's the same service I sell on the website. It's a great way to get your script into the hands of producers who are looking to make movies. Also on the website, you can read a quick bio on each reader and pick the one who you think would be the best reader for your screenplay. In the past week, I've rolled out a whole bunch of new services with this product. I now have a television script option, either 30-page or 60 pages, and I've added a proofreading service too, so if you don't want an analysis but would like someone to proofread your script, we now offer that as well. So if you want a professional evaluation of your screenplay at a very reasonable price, check out www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. In the next episode of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast, I'm going to be interviewing John Jarrell. It's the third installment of the interview, and I did a couple of months ago. You can find the first two installments on my blog. It's episodes 67 and 69 in case you want to catch up and listen to those. So keep an eye out for that episode next week. To wrap things up, I just want to touch on something from today's interview with Kane. I get a lot of people who want to write historical dramas, and I see these in the SYS Select forum. They're pitching their query letter, they're pitching their logline, and I always kind of give them a little, just a note saying, listen, you know this is going to be a very difficult script to sell and ultimately produce. And one of the reasons is because these historical dramas, typically there's a lot of production value, meaning it's expensive to produce. There's a lot of costumes. There's a lot of set dressing on the houses, on the locations. You need to bring in horses instead of cars. This stuff is all very, very expensive and really increases the production value and the cost of making a production like this. If you're considering writing some sort of a historical drama, a period piece, really anything that doesn't take place in modern times where you're going to need to use these kinds of, different types of sets and different types of clothes, different types of automobiles, maybe horses instead of cars, I would highly advise you to look at this movie, because this is actually a really good example of how you can do a historical drama fairly cheaply. If you watch this movie, you'll notice there's no big battle scenes. Like, they talk about some of the Civil War battles that the main guy was in. He talks about them, and I'm sure there's always from a director's standpoint, there's always this thing, hey, well, maybe I could just do a flashback and we have this big elaborate battle scene. They didn't do that in this, and I think smartly they didn't do it because it saves them money. So this is a great example of a movie, of a historical drama that could be made on a low budget. The cast is very, very contained. There's maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe like 9 roles total. Maybe even less than that. I think there's 4 and 7, maybe 7 roles. So it's very contained cast. There's really only 2 main locations. There's the house where the one family lives, the protagonist and his family lives, and then there's the house where the antagonist and his family lives. And once you get those locations, it's fairly easy. One of them is just like a little sort of a shack in the middle of the woods. So I'm sure they probably just found that location, and maybe they had to do a little bit of dressing. And then in the South too, sometimes you find these old houses that really look like they haven't been updated. Maybe you got to take down some electric wires. Maybe you got to take a TV antenna or a dish network or something antenna off the house. But other than that, the house looks like it was built in the mid 1800s. So again, you don't need a lot of production value. There were some horses in this, but a lot of the scenes took place in the woods. You know, the woods looks exactly the same now as it does back in the 1800s. So you don't have to like decorate or set that woods. And a lot of the scenes, most of the scenes, there were no horses. It was like, there was a lot of scenes where the people would meet in the woods, or they would be in the woods, and it would just be the people, no horses, no animals. So it's just a function of getting those costumes. And again, because the cast is so limited, you only need the 7 costumes. And once you have those costumes, you're pretty much locked in. So again, I think this is just a great example of a movie, of a historical drama, a period piece, and how you can do it on a limited budget. And it feels, by doing something like this, it feels kind of bigger than perhaps it is. I didn't ask him what the exact budget was, but you can watch this and you can see it's a pretty low budget movie. Good production value though. For what they did, they maximized their dollars, because they didn't have to spend, you know, $600,000 on one 30-second shot of a Civil War battle where there's cannons and horses and you know, hundreds of men in Civil War regalia running across a field. They didn't have to get those shots for this movie to work, and I think that's important. So again, if you're thinking of writing historical drama, I would highly advise you check out this movie. Give it a look and really look at what they did and how they did it, and think about maybe, if your movie is a historical drama, think about maybe how you can make it more contained and simple and easier to produce, because that's going to go a long way to helping you sell your script. Anyway, that's the show. Thank you for listening.